started when I was in business school about 21 years ago. I was dreaming about doing many of the things I'm doing now, and I wanted to start by managing bands, which I did do. I got out of that business fairly quickly. It was just a very difficult business, but I did want to start and get my career starting by managing bands, and tending to be a little academic. I thought if I'm going to work in entertainment and manage bands, I should study the lives of the great entertainment visionaries and the great artist managers. Being a lifelong Beatles fan, I thought that the Beatles and Brian were the team that wrote and then rewrote the rules of the pop music business. So that led me to a study of Brian. And as I said, this was 21 years ago. There was no Wikipedia, there was no YouTube, there were none of those online resources. And on top of that, there are no books about Brian Epstein in print. I mean, literally, when The Fifth Beatle comes out on November 19th, it will be the only book, graphic novel or otherwise, about Brian. So you can imagine my surprise that you can find a book about John Lennon's astrologist, and I couldn't find anything about Brian Epstein. So this became a little sort of mystery. I became sort of obsessed with trying to uncover the story of this guy who discovered and managed the band. It was shocking to me that the story hadn't already been told. And I wound up doing a lot of newspaper searches, meeting a lot of people who knew him. Most of the research for The Fifth Beatle was done through interviews, exactly tracking down the folks who knew Brian that are still alive and getting them to talk to me about Brian. So the Brian Epstein story, it is a great Beatles story. It talked, and that's what I was interested in at first, how he managed them, how he marketed them, how he got them a record deal when no one wanted to sign them, how he convinced Ed Sullivan to book them when a British band had never made an impact in the US, how he thought of the suits, the haircuts. That's a wonderful story, and it's all in the book, and that's well and good. But it was the human side of his story that really inspired me, to be completely honest.
That's what I was wanting to talk to you about, because Epstein, for the time, was very much an outsider, complicated private life. But will the graphic novel explore his inner demons and the dismissal of Pete Best and all these other things that happened around the time?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In my mind, the real heart of the story is the human side of the story.
Right.
In brief, he was gay and Jewish and from Liverpool. And in the 1960s, those were three significant obstacles. It was literally a felony to be gay. If it had come out that he was homosexual, he'd have been thrown in jail. There was quite a bit of anti-Semitism in the UK, and Liverpool was a port town, but there was nothing cultural going on in Liverpool. So for this gay Jewish man from Liverpool to run around saying, "I found a local band and they're going to be bigger than Elvis," it was quite literally laughable. But of course he was right, and he had a vision and a passion and a determination, and he made it happen. And to me, I'm of Indian origin. I was born in New York, but my family's from South America by way of India. As a young person of that ethnicity trying to make my way in the entertainment space, I really could relate to some of the struggles Brian faced. I really think of Brian as the ultimate outsider. And while I certainly don't want to claim that I've had the obstacles in my life that he had, the degree of obstacles, I really could relate to that sort of emotional struggle. And I find his story terribly inspiring, and that is all in the book. And that's, to me, that's really what the book is about.
That's what I was going to add, actually. What else could we expect from this very inspirational human story?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think if you're a Beatles fan, it's going to be a real treat, because, as I said, it's a story that hasn't been told before. But if you're not a Beatles fan, I think you're still going to get a lot out of the book, because, as I said, it's that sort of inspiring underdog story. We're also making a film. The film is very much in active development, and I always say with the film, yes, technically it's a music-related biopic, but it's far less like Ray or Walk the Line, and it's much more like Billy Elliot or Rocky. It's about that least likely guy to succeed going the distance, And in much the same way, you don't need to be a fan of boxing to like Rocky. You certainly don't need to be a ballet fan to enjoy Billy Elliot. You don't need to be a Beatles fan to love the Fifth Beatle. It's really, this might sound a little cheesy, but in my mind, it's for anyone who's ever dared to believe in a dream. That's what the story is about.
That is wonderful. I notice in the novel you have involvement from music legends Billy J. Kramer, Andrew Luke Oldham.
I do, yeah.
Lending their words to the novel. How did they get involved?
As I said, most of the work that I did on this book was through interviews. So really, it was just a matter of contacting them. I met Andrew Lou Oldham at a festival that he was speaking at, and I just approached him afterwards, and I said, Brian Epstein has been a great inspiration to me. I've often described Brian as my historical mentor, someone who I never had a chance to meet, but whose life I've looked to learn from. And I just explained to Andrew, I just walked up to him and I told him what Brian meant to me, and I said, I'm working on this project. I'd love for you to take a read and tell me what you think. And Andrew was so warm and welcoming, and he was totally happy to do that. And then he got back to me and gave me some critical feedback, some ideas for changes. He offered to write an introduction. It was wonderful. And Billy J. Kramer was very similar. I met somebody who knew him and said, "Oh, you should talk to Billy." And I said, "I'd love to talk to Billy." And so, and Billy was also very warm and open about his stories about Brian. And similarly, I asked, I said, "Would you mind, writing a few words that I could put at the beginning of the book?" And he was more than happy to do it. I'll just quickly say, I'm really happy to report that, pretty much everyone who I approached to talk about Brian, they were a little reticent at first, but after just sort of explaining where I was coming from, people have been so supportive of this project, and it really has been, personally, just a great joy to work on.
It's wonderful. Now, you mentioned there the feature film in development.
Yeah.
Do you have is there anyone actually been chosen or anyone in mind to play Epstein? Do you have somebody?
Not yet. I mean, right now, the most exciting news on the film is that we have the approval, the sign-off of the band of Paul, Ringo, Yoko, and Olivia Harrison, approved our script, which allowed us to do a deal with Sony ATV, who control the music publishing rights, and it's a long-winded way of saying we have access to Beatles music for the film. We are the first and only film in history to have gotten access to Beatles music, a film about the band. There have been other Beatles films like Backbeat or Nowhere Boy. If you go back and look at those films, you'll see there's no Beatles music in it. So we're very, very excited about that. And between the music rights and this graphic novel that's coming out, I'm happy to say we're enjoying a lot of enthusiasm and support in Hollywood circles and in UK film industry circles. And right now, our main goal is to attach a director. And we're in conversations with some really wonderful, sort of top-level directors, if you will. And then once we have our director attached, then we'll turn our attention to cast. So we're not really looking at casting right now.
That's so exciting.
Thank you.
Exciting project. Can you tell me a little bit more about the formats of the novel? When exactly it's out, just so our fans here.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for asking. So the book comes out on November 19th. If I can make a plug for it, it is already available for pre-order at Amazon, BarnesandNobles.com, and IndieBound. But November 19th is the date. It'll be in stores everywhere. And there are going to be 3 different versions of the book. They are all going to be oversized and hardcover to show off the artwork, which I'm very proud of. And there's a collector's edition, which will include 30 pages of bonus materials. It's an art gallery section by Andrew Robinson, the primary painter. And it's a particularly interesting section because it was very important for us to capture the period right, not just the faces of the iconic Beatles, but also the architecture, the clothing that people were wearing at the time. It was the birth of the psychedelic era, so the clothing and the style is itself a very big part of the story. So Andrew shows in his art gallery section his process on nailing that. So it's actually a really interesting section. And I've also put together a section of bonus materials with rare Beatles and Brian Epstein memorabilia, stuff that I've collected over the years that friends of Brian gave to me or lent to me for the book, which is also some stuff that I think even the most hardcore Beatles fans will never have seen before. So it's really kind of neat. And then finally, we're doing a limited edition version of the book, limited to 1,500 copies, signed and numbered, signed by myself and the other 2 artists, Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker. And that one comes in a special slipcase with an exclusive piece of art at the front. And all 3 will be out, as I said, on November 19th.